The morning of change. Jin's alarm clock blared with the intensity of 1,000 thunderclaps, its shrill sound invading the stillness of his room. The sudden shock of noise felt like a jolt straight through his body, pulling him out of the peaceful cocoon of sleep. He groaned, his hand fumbling blindly across the nightstand, knocking over a half-empty glass of water in his disoriented state. The cold, sticky sensation made him flinch, but it wasn't enough to fully shake off the sleepiness clinging to him. "Come on, Jin. Don't let the day start this way," he muttered to himself. But it didn't matter how much he willed the exhaustion to leave. Every morning felt like the same struggle, waking up and trying to gear up for the inevitable. His mind didn't want to focus on the day ahead. It didn't want to think about the pit that had formed in his stomach, that familiar weight of dread that seemed to settle deeper each time the school day began. Another day of wondering whether today would be the day someone would make a cruel remark. Another day of pretending that things were normal. The weight of his prosthetic leg had always been a reminder of that difference, but some days it felt heavier than others. 3 years had passed since the accident, and though his body had mostly adjusted, his mind still held on to memories of before, the days when he had 2 legs, and the world felt just a little bit simpler. Jin rubbed his eyes, trying to wake up properly. As he squinted, his eyes landed on the prosthetic leg resting against his nightstand. It was always there, a constant companion that he'd learned to navigate through life with, though it still felt strange. An appendage that wasn't really his, but one he had to use every day, no matter how unnatural it felt. Sometimes, it seemed like a reminder of his new reality, a reality that he couldn't fully embrace, no matter how hard he tried. He sighed, stretching his arms above his head as the morning light crept in through the window. Despite his lingering exhaustion, he knew he had to get up. It was time to face another day. Time to face the world that often seemed indifferent to him. Time to put on the mask that he wore so well, the one that convinced everyone around him he was okay, that he was just like any other kid his age. "Jin, honey, breakfast is ready." His mom's familiar voice called up the stairs. Her tone was always full of warmth, a comfort to him even on the hardest days. She didn't know the full extent of his struggles, how much he hated the stairs, how the whispers cut through him like sharp blades, but she tried her best to make sure he knew she was there for him, no matter what. "Coming, Mom," Jin called back, his voice cracking slightly as he dragged himself out of bed. He stood, his muscles aching slightly as his prosthetic leg clicked into place. The cold metal against his skin always made him feel distant from his own body, but he had learned to push that feeling aside, bury it deep down where it couldn't take over. Jin shuffled over to the mirror on the wall as he pulled on his uniform. His eyes met his reflection, and for a moment, he stopped to really look at himself. His dark skin contrasted sharply with the polished silver of his prosthetic leg, the cold metal gleaming in the soft morning light. His expression, a mix of weariness and resignation, stared back at him from the mirror. He was a teenager now, but his reflection still seemed like a child's, caught somewhere between who he used to be and who he had become. "Another day," Jin whispered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring himself or trying to convince his reflection. As he quickly finished getting dressed, he caught a glimpse of his crutches leaning against the wall. They were always nearby, a backup plan in case the leg didn't work right or if his body got too tired. He didn't want to rely on them, but sometimes they were his only option. Today, though, he would be okay. He hoped. Downstairs, the smell of pancakes and bacon filled the air. His mom had already set the table, as she always did, her movements graceful and efficient as she worked in the kitchen. "Good morning, sweetie. You're up early today," she said brightly as he entered, her smile warm as the sunlight pouring through the window. "Yeah, I didn't sleep much," Jin replied, though that wasn't entirely true. He had slept, but the dreams had been heavy, filled with shadows of things he didn't understand, things that made him wake up feeling more confused than before. "Well, sit down and eat something." You need energy for the day ahead. I know you're not a morning person, but you can't skip breakfast. It's important, you know." Jin smiled weakly, sitting at the table and helping himself to the food. His mom's concern was comforting, but it also made him feel guilty. She had no idea how hard it was for him to be normal. How hard it was to just be another kid in the school hallway, when all he wanted to do was disappear into the background. Sometimes, he felt like his mom was too optimistic for him. She believed that everything would be okay, that he could handle the stares and the whispers, but he wasn't so sure. He didn't want to disappoint her, though, so he nodded and ate, knowing it would make her happy. By the time he finished his meal, the anxiety was creeping back in, settling into his chest like a rock. He didn't want to go to school. He didn't want to face the glares, the teasing, or the well-meaning but intrusive questions. But he had no choice. He couldn't stay home. He didn't want to be that kid. So, with a deep breath, Jin grabbed his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and gave his mom a quick hug before heading out the door. It wasn't far to the bus stop. Just a short walk down the street, but with every step, it felt as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Each time someone glanced his way, Jin felt the familiar sting of their eyes on him, silently judging him for something he couldn't control. He wasn't like them. He wasn't like any of the other kids who ran and played without thinking about it. He was different. When the bus arrived, Jin climbed aboard, taking a deep breath as he made his way down the aisle. He could already feel the eyes following him. They always followed him, like he was a puzzle they couldn't quite figure out. There was a certain kind of pity in their gazes, and even worse, a sense of curiosity. He made his way to the back of the bus, finding an empty seat. Sitting down, he stared out the window, watching the world blur by as the bus rumbled along the streets. It was quieter back here, and he could almost pretend, just for a moment, that no one was watching him. But deep down, he knew better. The bus ride felt like it stretched on forever, and the weight in his chest only seemed to grow heavier. Today, though, something felt different. Something was about to change, though he had no idea what that was. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard a soft voice from the front of the bus. "Excuse me, young man. Would you be so kind as to give up your seat for me?" Jin turned his head, and his eyes landed on an elderly woman standing at the front of the bus. She was frail-looking, her silver hair neatly pinned back, and her face wore a gentle expression. Despite the crowd, despite the way the bus jolted and swerved, she seemed composed, as though the world was nothing more than a passing breeze to her. Without thinking, Jin stood up. It was automatic. The weight of his own hesitation melted away as he moved, the motion almost instinctual. "Of course," he said, his voice steady, but his heart began to race. This was the first time in a long time that someone had asked something like this of him. Maybe it was because of the way the woman looked, like she knew something, like she understood things in a way others didn't. He moved aside to let her sit down. The bus continued its route, but as it did, something in the air seemed to shift, a strange calm washing over him. Little did he know, this simple act of kindness would be the catalyst for something far bigger than he could ever imagine. As the woman settled into the seat, she turned to him with a smile, her eyes sparkling as though she held a secret, something precious that she was about to share. And with that one smile, everything began to change. The unfolding mystery. The bus ride continued, the rhythmic hum of the wheels on the asphalt blending with the occasional chatter from other passengers. But Jin couldn't focus on any of it. His mind raced, the woman's sudden request, and the note she had handed him stirring a strange curiosity deep inside. Who was she? Why had she given him the note? And most importantly, what did it mean? He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, that the act of giving up his seat for the elderly woman had set something in motion, something beyond his control. It wasn't just a casual kindness. It was as if the universe itself had orchestrated this moment, guiding him to this strange encounter for a reason. But what was the reason? Jin tried to ignore the unease creeping into his chest, hoping to focus on the ride to school. But even as the bus jolted along its usual route, every bump in the road seemed to echo with the unanswered questions swirling in his mind. The note, now safely tucked in his jacket pocket, felt like a weight he couldn't quite ignore. Every time he thought about it, his heartbeat quickened, his hands sweating. He was torn between curiosity and fear. What if opening it meant uncovering something he wasn't ready for? The elderly woman's smile lingered in his thoughts, her calm demeanor in the face of everything that had once seemed overwhelming to him. She had looked at him not with pity, but with understanding, as if she saw something in him that no one else did. Something special. But what could that possibly be? When the bus pulled up to his stop, Jen felt a surge of nerves. School was just around the corner, and with it came the usual battle to stay invisible. He hated being the center of attention, hated how people's eyes lingered on him, often whispering behind his back, sometimes even laughing. His prosthetic leg had become an unspoken subject of mockery, a visual reminder of the things he couldn't do the way the other kids did. But he had learned to hide his discomfort, burying it beneath layers of indifference. He had to. There was no other option. As Jin stepped off the bus and walked toward the school gates, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. He felt a sense of unease, like something was about to change. It was as if the universe had nudged him onto a new path, but the way ahead was shrouded in fog. He couldn't see what lay before him, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to be like anything he had experienced before. The school day passed in a blur of textbooks, disinterested teachers, and half-hearted conversations with classmates. Jin tried to focus on his studies, but the note remained at the forefront of his thoughts. He would occasionally catch himself staring out the window during class, lost in the sea of his own thoughts, and each time he would quickly shake his head, trying to pull himself back to the present. But it was no use. Every minute of silence in the classroom felt like a countdown, leading him to an inevitable moment when he would open the note. By lunchtime, Jin had had enough. His thoughts were too heavy to carry, and his curiosity about the note was becoming unbearable. He grabbed his tray from the lunch line, but instead of sitting in the cafeteria with the other kids, he found a quiet corner in the hallway. It was far enough away from the prying eyes of his classmates, and no one would bother him here. It was his safe place, a small spot of solace where he could eat in peace without the uncomfortable stares. He sat down on a bench, taking the note out of his pocket once again. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper, the neat, old-fashioned handwriting staring up at him. He could almost feel the weight of the words pressing against him, as if they were alive with meaning. Jin, if you are reading this, then you have already begun your journey. The world you see is not all that it seems. There is more to you, more to your life, than you could ever imagine. You are destined for something great, but you must be brave, and you must believe in yourself. I will be watching, and when the time is right, I will find you again. A friend. The words hung in the air like a riddle. Jin reread them twice, then 3 times, trying to make sense of it. It didn't make any sense. How could this woman know him? And what did she mean by there is more to you? He was just a regular kid, wasn't he? Just a kid who happened to have one leg and the weight of the world on his shoulders. Nothing extraordinary. He wasn't destined for greatness, was he? A sudden sharp voice broke through his thoughts, and Jin looked up to see one of his classmates, Jacob, standing in front of him, a look of curiosity on his face. "What are you reading?" Jacob asked, eyeing the folded note in Jin's hands. Jin's heart skipped a beat. He quickly shoved the note back into his pocket, trying to hide his unease behind a mask of indifference. "Nothing," Jin said, his voice sounding defensive. "Just, I don't know. Some weird thing." Jacob frowned but shrugged. "All right, whatever. I was just wondering why you were sitting all the way over here. You gonna join us in the cafeteria? Everyone's looking for you." Jin didn't answer right away. He wanted to stay here, away from the noise, away from the chaos of his classmates. But he knew he couldn't just avoid them forever. He stood up, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "Yeah, I'll come." As he walked to the cafeteria, the note weighed heavily on his mind. It was a simple, cryptic message, but something about it felt important. Something about it made Jin feel like he was on the cusp of discovering something about himself, something that could change everything. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel the pull, as though the note was the first step in a long journey. The rest of the school day went by in a blur. Jin sat through classes, though his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the note, the mysterious woman, and the strange words that had seemed so oddly familiar. As he walked home from school later that afternoon, the world around him felt different, as though it was all somehow connected in a way he hadn't seen before. The air was cooler than usual, the streets quieter. Everything seemed just a little bit off, but in a way that was hard to describe. When he finally arrived home, his mom greeted him at the door with a smile. "How was school?" she asked, her voice light, though her eyes seemed to hold a trace of concern. "It was fine," Jin replied, though it wasn't the truth. His mind was still far away, caught in the web of the note and the strange feelings it had stirred in him. "Well, you have some homework to do, and dinner will be ready soon," his mom said, walking into the kitchen. "But you're welcome to relax for a bit before that." Jin nodded absently, not really hearing her. He made his way upstairs to his room, his thoughts consumed by the note. He closed the door behind him and sat down on his bed. The words echoed in his mind like a mantra. "There is more to you." What did that mean? He ran a hand through his hair in frustration, his mind racing. Suddenly, it hit him, the feeling, the overwhelming certainty that something was about to change. The kind of change that Jin couldn't control, couldn't stop. He felt as though he was standing on the edge of something important, something that was both terrifying and thrilling. And in that moment, he understood one thing for sure. His life, his destiny, was no longer just about fitting in or surviving another day. It was about something much bigger, something he had to discover. The note, the mysterious woman, the words, everything was leading him somewhere. Somewhere that would change his life forever. But he wasn't sure he was ready for the journey. The weight of the secret. Jin lay in bed that night, his mind spinning in a whirlwind of thoughts. The silence of his room was deafening. It was the kind of silence that made him feel small, insignificant, like a grain of sand in the middle of a vast desert. He had closed his eyes for hours, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, the words of the note came flooding back, pushing out every other thought. "You are destined for something great, but you must be brave, and you must believe in yourself." The words echoed through his mind like a drumbeat, growing louder with every passing second. Jin had never been the type of person to believe in fate or destiny. His life had been defined by the accident that had cost him his life 3 years ago. Since then, he had learned to adapt, to live in a world that often felt unkind, but he never imagined that something like destiny could be part of his story. But what if the note was telling the truth? What if there really was something more to him than just the boy with one leg, the one who always felt like an outsider? What if he was destined for greatness? His chest tightened at the thought. Could that even be possible? Jin sat up in bed, his prosthetic leg hanging over the side. The cold metal seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of how different he was from the rest of the world. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface, as if trying to reach through it to the person he used to be. The one who hadn't felt this weight pressing on his chest every single day. The one who hadn't had to hide behind a mask of indifference just to survive. Greatness, he whispered to the darkness of his room. He had trouble imagining what that could mean for him. Sure, his mom always told him he was strong, that he had a heart full of potential, but to Jin, those words felt like empty platitudes. Everyone told him to believe in himself, to chase his dreams. But no one really understood how hard it was to believe in something when the world around you constantly told you that you were different. Maybe I am destined for something bigger, but how can I believe in that? He couldn't sleep. He knew he wouldn't be able to rest until he figured out what the note meant, what it was trying to tell him. There was a part of him, deep inside, that wanted to believe. But there was also a bigger part that feared what would happen if he did. If he believed in the note's message, in the possibility that he was special, what would that mean for everything he had known? For the life he had built after the accident? Would it all change? Could it change? Jin swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood up, pacing around his room. He needed answers. He had to understand what the woman had meant. Maybe it wasn't just a message. It could be a clue, a key to unlocking something in his life he couldn't yet see. He had to find her again. He needed to know who she was, why she had given him the note, and what the something great was that she had spoken of. The thought made his heart race. What if the woman had known something he didn't? What if this wasn't just about him? What if it was about everyone? Without realizing it, Jin had crossed the room and stood before his window, staring out into the moonlit night. The cool breeze through the window brushed against his skin, and he could feel a tingling sense of anticipation in the air. The night was alive with possibilities, and he could almost hear the faint hum of the universe, like a whisper just beyond his reach. Greatness, he whispered again, a sense of resolve beginning to form inside him. What if I'm meant for something more than just surviving? Jin was certain of one thing now. He couldn't ignore the note. He couldn't pretend it didn't mean anything, that it was just a random act of kindness from an old woman. It was more than that. It was a sign that his life was about to change. But where did he even begin? The next day at school felt different. The hallways, the classrooms, even the cafeteria, they all felt distant, like a world he didn't quite belong to anymore. He could feel the weight of the note pressing on him, its message seeping into every corner of his mind. Even his usual routines felt off, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to take the next step. It was during lunch that something unexpected happened. Jin was sitting at his usual table, picking at his food, when Jacob sat down across from him, his eyes scanning Jin's face like he was trying to figure something out. "What's up with you today?" Jacob asked, his voice unusually serious. "You've been acting weird." Jin looked up, startled. It wasn't like Jacob to ask him anything that wasn't about video games or sports. He was one of the few kids who didn't tease Jin, but he also wasn't someone who ever seemed particularly interested in Jin's personal life. Until now. "I'm fine," Jin replied quickly, trying to brush it off. "Just tired, I guess." Jacob raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "You sure about that? You've been quiet all day, more than usual." Jin sighed. He didn't want to talk about it. How could he explain that something inside him was shifting, that he felt as though his entire world was on the verge of unraveling, and he didn't know if he was ready for it? "I'm just thinking about some stuff," Jin said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He immediately regretted it. "Stuff?" Jacob leaned in, his interest piqued. "What kind of stuff?" Jin hesitated. He couldn't tell Jacob about the note. Not yet. It was too strange, too out there. Jacob would think he was crazy. "I don't know," Jane finally muttered, shaking his head. "Just stuff. I don't even know what it means." Jacob studied him for a moment before nodding, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. "Well, if you ever want to talk about it, you know where to find me." Jin forced a small smile, grateful for the offer, but he didn't take him up on it. He couldn't. He had to figure this out on his own. That night, after dinner, Jin sat at his desk, the note in front of him once again. The words felt heavier now, like they had transformed into something more than just ink on paper. "There is more to you." What was it? What was this more that he was meant to find? Was it some kind of secret? Was he part of something bigger than himself? And how could he ever figure it out? His hand shook as he picked up the note again, running his fingers over the carefully written words. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and wait for something to happen. Jin stood up abruptly, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to wait around for fate to find him. If there was something to this, he was going to find it. He would start looking for the woman again. He had to know who she was and what she knew. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jin grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, stepping into the night with a newfound determination. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but he couldn't let fear hold him back anymore. The universe had set something in motion, and now it was up to him to follow it. A path unseen. The next few days felt like a blur for Jin. After that night when he decided to take matters into his own hands, the world around him seemed to change in subtle ways. His routine, his interactions with classmates, even the way he walked down the hallways of school, all of it felt different, like he was on the precipice of something much larger than he could understand. But still, there was no sign of the elderly woman. She hadn't appeared again, and Jin couldn't shake the feeling that the note was urging him to do something, to seek, but he had no idea where to look. He spent hours researching, searching online for anything that could give him a clue about the cryptic message. "You are destined for something great." What did that even mean? Was it a prophecy, a warning, or something else entirely? He even wondered if there was a hidden meaning to the woman's kindness, if perhaps this note was a part of a larger plan, something that would somehow reveal itself in time. But no matter where he looked, no matter how many websites he combed through or books he skimmed, there was nothing. The world around him felt mundane, normal, yet Jin couldn't escape the sense that he was caught up in something bigger. The feeling tugged at him like an invisible thread, drawing him forward, making his pulse race every time he thought about it. He began to visit the bus stop every morning, hoping to see the elderly woman again. Each day, he would arrive early, scanning the crowd of people as they bustled about, waiting for the bus to show up. But she never came. It was as if she had vanished, disappeared from his life, the moment she had handed him that strange note. Jin had no choice but to move forward on his own. As the days passed, the uncertainty that had plagued him seemed to grow heavier. Jin tried his best to focus on school, but every lesson, every conversation, felt hollow. His classmates didn't know what he was going through. They couldn't. They didn't see the pull he felt toward something greater, something unknown. They just saw the kid with one leg, the one who always stayed in the background, the one who couldn't keep up with the sports, the one who got quiet when they made fun of his limp. In the evenings, Jin found himself alone in his room, staring at the note once more, wondering if it had been a mistake to let it consume him so fully. But deep down, he knew that something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. He wasn't meant to be just another forgotten kid. One afternoon, while walking home from school, Jin took a different route. It wasn't something he'd ever done before, but something urged him to turn left at the corner near the park, instead of going straight toward his usual path. The weather was overcast, and the clouds hung low, casting a soft, muted light over the streets. As he walked, his footsteps echoing on the pavement, he noticed a small bookshop tucked away in a corner he'd never noticed before. Its window was dusty, and the sign hung crookedly. Without thinking, Jin walked toward it, a strange feeling bubbling in his chest. He'd never been the type to be interested in bookstores, not like some of the other kids who loved to read and get lost in fiction. But something about this place felt different. It felt like it belonged to a different world, a world that called to him. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and leather, the soft hum of a bell sounding as the door creaked open. The place was small, with shelves lining the walls, filled with books in every direction. Jin hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, letting the door shut softly behind him. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his nose, his gray hair neatly combed. He looked up as Jin entered and gave him a warm smile. "Looking for something?" the man asked, his voice gentle but knowing, as though he had been waiting for Jin's arrival. Jin hesitated. There was something about the way the man looked at him, something about the way the shop felt that made Jin nervous and yet strangely calm at the same time. I don't know, Jin muttered, just looking around. The man nodded as if he had expected the answer. Take your time. There's no rush. Jin wandered deeper into the shop, running his fingers over the spines of books, some old, some worn with age. As he moved toward the back of the store, something caught his eye. A small ornate box sitting on a shelf between two dusty tomes. It wasn't much to look at first, but as Jin drew closer, he felt an odd sensation rise in his chest, a pull, like the box was calling to him. Without thinking, Jin reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the cool wood, a jolt of energy passed through him, almost as though the box were alive, pulsing with a hidden force. He gasped, pulling his hand back, unsure of what had just happened. But the strange compulsion to open it remained. The old man appeared beside him, having silently followed Jin. "Ah, I see you found it," he said softly, his eyes twinkling. "Not many people can feel it." Jin looked up at him, a mix of confusion and curiosity on his face. "What is it?" The man's smile deepened. "That is no ordinary box. It holds what you seek, but only if you are ready. Some find it too much, too soon. Others discover their path when they open it." Jin swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. Could this box be connected to the note? Was this the answer he had been searching for? The man seemed to know something. He could feel it, as though the words were just out of reach. "Are you saying this box has something to do with me?" Jin asked, his voice trembling slightly. He couldn't quite bring himself to ask directly about the note or its mysterious message. He wasn't sure how to approach it. The old man's gaze softened, and he nodded slowly. "Everything is connected, young man. The universe has a way of guiding us, of opening doors when the time is right. What's inside this box might be the key to your journey, or it might not. But it will be your choice to make." Jin felt a surge of energy at the mention of a journey. Could this really be it? Could this be the moment when everything changed? With a deep breath, he reached for the box once more. This time, his fingers didn't hesitate. He gently lifted the lid, the small hinges creaking softly as the box opened. Inside, instead of any tangible object, there was a swirling mist, glowing faintly with a blue light. The mist seemed to form shapes, swirling and shifting, like it was alive, waiting for him to step forward. The old man stood silently, watching as Jin's face shifted from confusion to awe. "This is your destiny, Jin," the man said, his voice low and reverent. "What you do with it is up to you." Jin could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he stared at the mist before him. It was as if the universe itself was revealing something to him, a truth he had never known. And suddenly, he understood. He wasn't just meant to survive. He wasn't meant to live in the shadows of his past. He was meant to change the world. The awakening. Jin could hardly believe what he was seeing. The mist inside the box swirled around, its soft, glowing light illuminating the dim corners of the bookshop. It was as if time had stopped, the world outside fading into a distant blur. The warmth of the mist enveloped him, filling his lungs with a strange, ethereal energy that made his heart race. He felt alive. More than alive. He felt connected to something far beyond his understanding, like the very fabric of the universe was pulsing within him. His prosthetic leg, which had always felt like a burden, now seemed to hum with power, as if it too were part of this awakening. He could feel the energy in his bones, in the air, in the mist that surrounded him. It was as though everything had led to this moment, this instant when the world opened up before him, and his destiny was no longer just a vague promise. It was real. The elderly man watched him closely, his eyes filled with a knowing, almost ancient wisdom. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked softly. "The shift within you." Jin nodded slowly, unable to speak. Words felt inadequate in that moment. He couldn't explain the sensations coursing through him, the way everything seemed to align, as if all the years of struggle, of pain, of doubt, had been a preparation for this. This was the moment he had been waiting for, even if he hadn't known it until now. "Don't be afraid," the old man continued, his voice steady but kind. "This power, this connection, it is part of who you are. You were never meant to be ordinary. You are a part of something greater than yourself." Jin looked up at the man, his mind racing with questions, but before he could ask anything, the mist began to shift again, forming into shapes, symbols and images that he didn't understand, yet somehow felt familiar. There was one shape, though, that caught his eye, a symbol that glowed brighter than the others. It was an intricate pattern, like an intertwined spiral, with lines that seemed to move and twist in on themselves, creating a sense of infinite motion. "This is the symbol of the Heartstone," the old man said, his voice now tinged with reverence. "It is the mark of the chosen. The one who carries it will change the course of history. You are the one who will shape the future." Jin's breath caught in his throat. The words felt impossible. Chosen. He had never been anyone special, just a kid with one leg, trying to get by in a world that didn't seem to care. How could he be chosen? He wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the mist seemed to answer for him. The swirling symbols began to slow down, the Heartstone symbol becoming clearer. Suddenly, the mist condensed into a small, shining stone, resting within the box. Jin reached out, trembling, and touched it. The moment his fingers made contact, a rush of energy shot through him, and the world seemed to shatter apart. He saw flashes, memories that weren't his, glimpses of other places, other lives. He saw battles fought between ancient civilizations, moments of great loss and triumph. He saw humans, not just from Earth, but from other worlds, standing together in defiance of a dark force that threatened everything. And through it all, he saw himself, standing at the center of it all, the symbol of the Heartstone blazing on his chest. The vision lasted only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. Jin pulled his hand back, his head spinning as the world around him returned to focus. The bookshop, the elderly man, and the mist were all there. But something had changed. Jin felt different, more aware, more alive. His chest was heavy with the weight of what he had just seen, and the words the old man had spoken echoed in his mind. "You are the one who will shape the future." But how? What was he supposed to do with this knowledge, with this power he had just uncovered? Jin wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain. He could never go back to the way things were before. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that involved the fate of the universe itself. The old man watched him with understanding. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly, "but you are ready, Jin. The universe has been preparing you for this moment, whether you knew it or not. The Heartstone is the key to unlocking your true potential. It will guide you, but you must learn to trust it. You must learn to trust yourself." Jin's hands trembled as he held the small stone in his palm. It was warm now, a steady pulse that seemed to beat in sync with his heart. He couldn't deny it. He could feel its power, but the fear still gnawed at him. How could someone like him be capable of changing the world? He had spent so long just trying to survive, to fit in, to prove that he wasn't defined by his disability. How could he be great? The old man seemed to read his thoughts. Greatness is not about fame or recognition, Jin. It's about courage. It's about standing up for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. It's about using your gifts, whatever they may be, not for your own benefit, but for the greater good. Jin looked down at the stone again, feeling its warmth seep into his skin. There was a time when he had wanted nothing more than to be like everyone else, to blend in, to go unnoticed, to have a life without the constant reminder of what he had lost. But now, standing here in this small, forgotten bookshop, he understood that his path wasn't about fitting in. It was about standing out, about embracing the power that was now within him. But where did he go from here? "What do I do now?" Jin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "You must follow the Heartstone's guidance. It will lead you to where you need to go. You will find others, people who are also connected to the stone, and together you will face what is to come." Jin nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no turning back now. The future was calling to him, and no matter how uncertain it felt, he had to follow it. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a victim of fate. He felt like he was choosing his destiny. With a final glance at the old man, Jin stepped out of the bookshop, the Heartstone safely tucked in his pocket. As he walked into the cool night air, the weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had before. There was power within him now. There was purpose, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The call of destiny. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty for Jin. After the revelation in the bookshop, his world had shifted in ways he couldn't fully grasp. He no longer felt like an ordinary boy, burdened by his prosthetic leg and the weight of his insecurities. Now he carried something more, a deep sense of purpose, a connection to a force far beyond his understanding. He kept the Heartstone close, tucked safely inside his jacket pocket, its faint pulse a constant reminder of the power he now wielded. It wasn't a power that made him invincible, but a power that spoke of potential, of a path he was yet to walk. He could feel it guiding him, gently urging him to follow, to trust in what was ahead. But the road was unclear, and Jin had no map to show him where it would lead. The world outside his home felt unfamiliar, even more so now that he had tasted the truth of his destiny. Each time he walked through the halls of school, the familiar faces of his classmates seemed distant, as if they existed in a different world altogether. They laughed, they played, they lived their lives, but Jin felt disconnected from it all. He was no longer a mere boy who struggled to fit in. He was becoming someone else, someone who had a purpose beyond the mundane. As he walked down the street toward the bus stop one afternoon, his mind was consumed by thoughts of the Heartstone and the cryptic words the old man had shared with him. The universe had been preparing him for something, he had said, but for what? And why him? He shook the questions from his mind, focusing on the here and now. But even as he tried to center himself, the nagging feeling remained. There was something more he needed to understand. It was during that bus ride, just a week after his encounter in the bookshop, that Jin's life took yet another unexpected turn. As usual, he sat near the back of the bus, his prosthetic leg propped on the seat beside him. He always chose the back because it gave him space, a bit of solitude in the sea of strangers. The bus rumbled along the familiar route, the noise of the city blending into a background hum. Jin leaned back, staring out the window, lost in thought. But then he saw her. The elderly woman. The same one from the day he gave up his seat on the bus. She was standing at the bus stop, her cane in hand, waiting patiently as the bus approached. Jin's heart skipped a beat. She looked exactly the same, her face lined with age, but there was a certain calmness to her, an aura of quiet strength. Without thinking, Jin stood up, his leg clicking slightly as he moved, and made his way toward the front of the bus. He didn't care that others were eyeing him, or that the seat was now taken by another passenger. He reached the door, and with a slight nod to the driver, stepped outside. The elderly woman looked up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and recognition. Jin smiled softly. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the empty seat beside him. "You can sit here." The woman's lips curled into a smile, her eyes twinkling with a quiet knowing. She nodded her thanks and slowly made her way toward him, her cane tapping softly against the pavement. As she sat down next to him, the bus began its journey once again, the rhythmic hum of the engine providing a sense of comfort. But this time, there was something different. This time, the air between them was thick with anticipation, like something was about to unfold. "I was wondering when you'd come back," the woman said, her voice gentle yet firm. "You've been on a journey, haven't you?" Jin's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you?" "I know more than you think, Jin," she replied, her gaze steady. "The Heartstone doesn't choose just anyone. It chooses those who are ready, those who have the strength to face what's coming. And you, my dear, are ready." Jin felt his pulse quicken, his thoughts racing. "What's coming?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't understand." The woman leaned closer, her gaze dropping to the stone in Jin's pocket. She didn't need to ask to know it was there. "Darkness," she said softly. "There is a force, an ancient, unseen force, that seeks to unravel everything. It's been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now it has found its target." Jin swallowed hard, his mind whirling with fear and confusion. "But what does this have to do with me? I'm just a kid. I'm not ready for something like this." The woman's expression softened. "None of us ever feel ready when we are called. But that's what makes us stronger. The Heartstone chose you because it saw something in you, something deep within, something that others may not understand. It's time for you to learn how to harness that power. You are not alone, Jin. There are others out there, people who share your path. Together, you can stop the darkness before it consumes everything." Jin felt a chill run down his spine at her words. The weight of her statement hung heavily in the air. And for a moment, he couldn't find his voice. What was she saying? Who else was out there? And how was he supposed to stop something so vast, so unknown? "You're not alone," the woman repeated, her voice a whisper of reassurance. "But you will need to act quickly. The darkness is growing stronger every day. It knows you've awakened, and it will stop at nothing to keep you from fulfilling your destiny." The bus slowed to a stop, the sound of the brakes hissing as it pulled into the next station. The elderly woman looked at Jin one last time, her eyes filled with both concern and determination. "Listen to the Heartstone," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the bus. "It will guide you. Trust it, and trust yourself." With that, she stood, her cane tapping against the floor as she made her way toward the door. Just before she stepped off the bus, she turned back to Jin, her eyes locking onto his with a piercing intensity. "You are the key, Jin. Don't forget that." And just like that, she was gone, swallowed up by the crowd outside. Jin sat in stunned silence, his heart pounding in his chest. The bus rumbled back into motion, but all he could focus on were her words. "The darkness is growing stronger." Those words echoed in his mind, sending waves of uncertainty crashing through him. What had he gotten himself into? But no matter how terrified he felt, there was something else beneath the fear, a spark of resolve. The Heartstone had chosen him. It had led him here, to this moment. And somehow, he knew that this was only the beginning. There was a battle coming, a fight that would test everything he knew about himself, about his strength, and about his purpose. Jin took a deep breath, his fingers brushing the smooth surface of the Heartstone in his pocket. Whatever came next, he was ready. He had to be. For the sake of everything he held dear, he couldn't afford to fail.